Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 698, Life is What We Make It. Now, some of you have maybe heard this line before. Some will argue that Emily maybe didn't invent this line, that it's the cliched line of all cliched lines. Everything in your life is about the attitude that you have as you approach it. But as is typical of our study of Emily, she's always playing different types of games. So even this very, can we call it a cliche? Even this very idea or cliche is for Emily going to have a twist. And so we'll be playing that game. Now, we're back to some earlier studies. Do you guys remember when we did 193? I shall know why when time is over and I've ceased to wonder why. Christ will explain each separate anguish in the fair schoolroom of the sky. He will tell me what Peter promised, and I, for wonder at his woe, I shall forget the drop of anguish that scalds me now, that scalds me now. You'll maybe remember when we did 225. Jesus, thy crucifix enable thee to guess the smaller size. Jesus, thy second face mind thee in paradise of ours. And then finally, you'll remember when we did 241, I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Men do not sham convulsion nor simulate a throe. The eyes glaze once, and that is death. Impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead by homely anguish stung. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments where we commented, for example, on the fact that Emily is raised devout Christian, but she will spend her entire life pushing or struggling. Can I use the term wrestle because that's her favorite? One of her favorite word pictures, as we said, is that famous Joseph or Jacob wrestling with the angel. And so she loved that idea that much of her wrestling was much of her poetry was a kind of wrestling. I'm also hopeful that you've worked through the preceding 697 poems. We just finished with 697. I could bring you jewels. And again, you can place what we're about to study within the broader context of Emily's poems. Now, the great scholar Miller has commented on Emily's attempts to, she says, much of Emily's poetry, like Baroque poetry in prose, moves by a sequence of points and paradoxes revealing the energy of a single apprehension in the writer's mind. And I think this is a classic example of what Miller is talking about. Now, for questions, as we come to the biography of Emily, one of them is Emily a person of faith? We will see in this poem that maybe this is an example of where Emily will say that she might doubt God but trust Christ. Let's take a look at it and see how she says it. She says, life is what we make it. Death we do not know. Christ's acquaintance with him justify him though. He would trust no stranger other could betray. Just his own endorsement, that sufficeth me. All the other distance he hath traversed, first no new mile remaineth, far as paradise. His sure foot preceding, tender pioneer. Base must be the coward, dare not venture now. Now, this is a fascinating study for us on a number of counts. Notice we'll begin with this aphorism that life is what we make it. Notice it's not what I make it. Notice it's not what you make it. Notice Emily will include you, the reader. Again, Chats with Emily's our playlist for a reason. She says, we're all in this together, and we get to decide about the choices that we make. Okay, that makes some sense for a first line. Then she introduces the D word, death. And notice she'll go from life to death. And if you haven't put that in your notes, go ahead and identify it. In line 1, it's life. In line 2, it's death. In other words, the whole side of the coin. Yes? The one side heads life, the other side tails death, or reverse it if you like. By the way, just to remind, 135 poems will mention for Emily death. She says, life is what we make it. Death, dash, we do not know, dash. Well, that's strange. I mean, epistemologically, that makes very little sense. What do you mean we don't know death? I mean, hello? It's what all the classic poems are about. Beowulf dies, right? Achilles dies. Agamemnon dies, right? Okay, so what do you mean we don't know? Oh, you mean we don't know as in personal experience? No. And yet, if you'll think about it, Emily's constantly playing games with dying. I heard a fly buzz when I died, for example, right? So what does she mean, death? We do not know. And then she gets to the third line. Christ's acquaintance with him justify him though. Now, it's interesting. Christ is used or referenced in 9 of Emily's poems. Who is the him she's talking about? Christ's acquaintance with him. Well, it's capitalized, which suggests it's talking about death. In other words, in the story of Jesus Christ, Christ experiences death. But of course, in the Christian tradition, he also experiences resurrection. Oh, so in other words, now Emily is saying, when we choose in our choices about life and what we make of it, we should probably give some consideration to both not just life, but also death. Notice the word justify. Now, Emily knew her Plato. And Plato, Republic 10, 617, what is it? The responsibility is with the chooser. God is justified in the myth of error. We've given full lectures on the Republic at learnstrong.net if you're interested in running that one to ground. Notice the use of the word though, with the dash that sets it off. In other words, even though one must die, she will argue Christ is the figure that has experienced not just life, but death, and then re-life. Can I say it that way, as in resurrection? Then notice we're back to another pronoun. And notice how she won't tell us whether the he of the next line is in fact death or Christ. Although, obviously, we'll see that it is Christ, who she will call a tender pioneer. Oh, what an interesting phrasing of Jesus Christ. He would trust no stranger other could betray. Well, that's interesting, given, of course, that Jesus Christ was betrayed. Not just betrayed, but betrayed by one who was very close to him. And betrayed how? Not by a stranger, but by a kiss from Judas, one of his own followers. And then the word just again, right? Brilliant how she keeps playing with her Plato. His own endorsement, and then she'll say it. That, dash, sufficeth me, dash. Notice sufficeth. Only time she ever uses it in all her poetry is here. What's it mean? It's enough. That is enough for me, she says. I don't need anything else other than that. Which some of you will say, wait. This runs completely counter to so many earlier poems we've already read of Emily's, where she's constantly struggling with her faith and whether she actually believes it or not. Is it enough to believe? And now all of a sudden, notice what she says. It's enough for me. That's all I need to know. Look at the next word. I think it is the word all. Right? Emily will in fact say in a classic poem, all is the price of all. She'll say it that way in 772. We'll soon get there. All the other distance, notice capitalized. He hath traversed first. In other words, the belief in Christ, for Emily, is the belief that everything I've experienced or could experience, i.e. death, has already been traversed. Notice we go from traverse to pioneer, the voyager, if you will. It's quite brilliant, right? Playing, of course, with our notion of the Odyssey and Odysseus taking his journey and all of that. Or, if you will, Dante, of course, through the journey of the Divine Commedia that we all love so much. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on all these poems. He hath traversed first. And then notice the capitalization. No new mile remaineth. Far as paradise. Now, of course, paradise is a fascinating word, because that's Milton's word, Paradise Lost, of course. And in that regard, it's one of Emily's favorite poems, right? The idea that what is it we all aspire to? Well, obviously, paradise is a kind of phrasing of that. His sure foot preceding, tender pioneer. She uses this word tender in 24 of her poems. Pioneer, the only other use of that word is 892. And it is interesting that Emily is writing in a time of what? The pioneers. Of course, all of that movement west. I can't help but remind ourselves that her contemporary is Walt Whitman, who is, of course, writing all of those really famous poems about the pioneers of the West. But notice, a tender pioneer. In other words, why tender? Well, some of you will say tender because loving, kind, or tender because, is killed, death, sad, right? Crucifixion, a horrific way to go. The agony that she will reference in other poems, tender pioneer. And then she'll say it, base must be the coward. Whoa! Emily does not do this very often in her poetry. Did you see coward capitalized? Base must be the coward, dare not venture now. Now this word dare, of course, will take us to our study of T.S. Eliot in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Do I Dare Disturb the Universe, right? The idea of what it is you're willing to dare, willing to try. Her use of the word venture will take us when we get there to poem 847. And we'll play that game when we get there. It reads like this at 847. She'll say, finite to fail, but infinite to venture. For the one ship that struts the shore, many's the gallant, overwhelmed creature nodding in navies nevermore. And then the use of the word now at the end of the poem brings an immediacy and a presence to this poem. Notice how it's set off with the dashes. Yes? In other words, her argument seems to be, no, you have to decide how you're going to live your life. But it might make sense to at least consider the potentialities of a bit of guidance in your venture. Now, when we get to poem 1433, we're going to come back to this poem again. In this remarkable little poem, we'll play around with some similarities. How brittle are the piers on which our faith doth tread. No bridge below doth totter so, yet none hath such a crowd. It is as old as God. Indeed, 'twas built by him. He sent his son to test the plank, and he pronounced it firm. There are readers of Emily that say she has no Christian faith. Clearly, a poem like this, and the one we just quoted of 1433, proves otherwise. Okay, what are we going to do with a poem like this at 2a? I think her argument is that life is all about who or what we trust, right? Think about that. And life is, of course, a venture where one must take that challenge, that venture. At 2b, I love her use of the pronouns in this poem and the way in which we're moving from Christ to death. And then, how about this one? Some readers of this poem read, as they do often, in fact, even 1433, as ironic. That, in fact, Emily is not actually arguing exactly what she's arguing, but rather maybe the complete opposite with Tender Pioneer. How do you read it? Of course, at 3a, Milton's Paradise Lost immediately comes to mind. And finally at 3b, to own a poem like this, on what do you believe? On what do you trust? And on what do you place your venture? I hope Emily is challenging you. Thank you.